Hello, welcome to the online instructional module for US history. The activity today is Jigsaw activity. In your classroom you may have a few problems that are pretty typical, a few issues. Students aren't willing to do tons of homework. That's one. There is a wide range of ability levels among your students. That's two. And it's difficult to maintain high levels of student engagement. We want to keep them riveted and up to their necks in history and historical thought, historical skills while they're in our classroom, but easier said than done sometimes. The solution is the jigsaw. Today we'll tell you how to execute a jigsaw activity. It's really very easy and also effective. So nice combination here, as you will see. We're going to be taking a look at Standard 3, Analyze the Causes of the American Revolution, 3A, 3B, 3C, and we're going to show how groups can attack this standard, do some peer teaching, do some peer learning, and come out in good shape. From your point of view, one of the nice things about the jigsaw activity is that the prep work is very minimal. In fact, there's only one thing you have to do to set up, really, and you have two choices. Number one, you can have the students count off by 3s or 4s or 5s or however many elements or topics you want them to address. For example, if there are 5 topics, you would have the students count off by 5s. If there are 2 topics, you would have the students count off by 2s, etc. Or you can do it in a targeted fashion. If you know that element 3B is more challenging, if there's more meat on the bones there, you may want to give that to certain students, knowing that they'll be particularly well equipped to handle it, instead of just throwing fate to the wind and taking a chance that 3B is going to end up in the hands of a few students who would have a really hard time learning it fairly quickly and then teaching it to peers. So sometimes you may want to go with the random approach, other times targeted may be most appropriate. Phase 1 of the jigsaw is that after you've counted off or assigned groups, the students reposition. They physically get up and they move to be with people who have their same number. So all the number 1s get together, you've got 3A. All the number 2s get together, you've got 3B, and so forth. This is nice because we know students like to be active. This is a strategy for getting a little spike in engagement. The classroom will get loud for a second, but the students kind of wake up and move around and are ready to engage. Step 2 of phase 1.
Group research.
As the students are forming groups, try to get in their hands a range of resources. If all you have is the textbook, that's okay. But if you've got review books, if you've got other alternative textbooks, if you've got the internet, if you've got handouts, any sort of different resources you can put in their hands would be great. The reason why is that when, let's say, 5 students get together and they all have 3A, well, if they're all looking at the same textbook, the very same textbook, and they're looking at the very same page, you're limited. Now, on the plus side, they can all try to decipher a text together, which has its benefits. But on the minus side, you might want to get them looking at different texts. That way they can harvest different ideas, and then when they put their brains together, when they discuss and share out and try to make some hay, they're going to have different ideas, different facts to pull from. Step 2 is that these groups, these newly formed groups, are going to research together and learn together. You want to make sure to emphasize to your students that they're not just sitting next to someone, they're working with them. That means talking. That means sharing. That means asking questions of each other. That means trying to clarify with each other. That means all working together to figure out how to express something, how to make sense of it. Collaboration is utilizing multiple brains to create the best product possible. So depending on the topic, this takes maybe a class period or the bulk of your work period one day, or it may take less. It depends on what topic you've got, it depends on the ability of your students, it even depends on what point in the semester. If it's early and the students are pretty raw in terms of their skills and their comfort level in working with one another, it might take longer. Whereas some students with a lot of experience in your classroom or a particularly high skill level, they might be able to dive in and knock this out in less time than some others might. So this can be done again in one class period or perhaps a part of a class period. Well, that puts you in position to move to phase 2. Phase 2 is you're going to reformulate the groups. What you'd have is a situation where you're going to have a student who has 3A sitting next to a student who has 3B, sitting next to a student who has 3C, and you could do the same for any standard that you're doing. You want to recombine such that the new groups that form in phase 2 are representing all the elements or all the topics that you plan to cover. Sometimes there are odd numbers. Of course, we as teachers know you have to be adaptable and just work it out. You know, if there are a couple of strong students, well, maybe they can be sort of down a person and still cover it okay, whereas some weaker students, you'd want to make sure they don't come up short as far as populating all the standards and covering all the bases. What you're going to have in phase 2 is peer teaching. And the flip side of that coin that we really need to emphasize is peer learning. Because I think we tend to focus on, well, what is the student doing to teach her peers? Is that getting done properly? But the flip side of the coin is equally, if not more important, and that is, what are the peers doing to learn? So we're going to talk about both sides of this coin, both the teaching and learning that should go on in phase 2 of the jigsaw. First, peer teaching. The student is pretty likely to want to read to her classmates. Maybe she's reading from the book, maybe she's reading from her notes. We need to tell students right away this is not teaching. That's called reading. And we need to break them of that habit. Instead, we want them explaining. We want them being conversational where possible. We want them providing examples. We want them utilizing resources. For example, if we're having the students teach Standard 3, and we can look at a map of the French and Indian War, or we can look at a map of the 13 colonies, or we can refer to the book where there's a timeline of the 1750s, 1760s, 1770s. It's really helpful. And if your students are teaching it to each other, they need to realize that that helps their peers learn to utilize visuals in that way. Maybe even different textbooks if you have those accessible, but even the textbook you do have has probably got some visual or another that could help. The flip side of the coin is learning, of course, and we often see that students are passive listeners, passive learners. We want the opposite. We want to teach them to be active, engaged listeners. Well, what does that mean? Not just paying attention, but asking questions, asking for examples. Oh, the British were very harsh in their policies and really tightened the reins on the colonists. Well, the peer learner needs to ask, well, like what? What do they do? Also, the student in this scenario, not the student teacher, but the student learner in this scenario can ask for connections. Well, is that like this? Is it like that? Or the learner can make connections of his own. And also in the jigsaw, we want to see students taking notes in their own words. It's a bad habit, sort of a crutch, that students may want to write down every word that their classmate says. I've walked around a classroom and I've had students tell their peer, the peer teacher, um, repeat that or give that to me again. And they have them do it a couple times. And the reason is so they can write down the exact wording that their peer used. And I try to stop them right in their tracks. I say, you can't try to get down every word. That's not possible. It's not even a good idea, because then you're just parroting instead of truly understanding. Also, it's good preparation for college to try to paraphrase, summarize, use some version of shorthand.
Because in college, of course, it'll be impossible for them to write down every word the professor says, so let's start them on good habits now. Now, as far as what you do with the jigsaw, you can either use it as a means to an end, in other words, a way to have students learn material without having to dig for it all themselves. They're able to partner or collaborate with peers to learn it, which saves them time and also increases their collaboration and communication skills. But if you want to make it into an assessment, you can do a group grade. You can grade them on their home group, in other words, in phase one, when they sit with students who have the same element. Well, then everybody takes the test on standard 3 or the quiz, and you can give some sort of group grade depending on how the individual does and the group does, average them or something along those lines. Or you can grade the phase 2 group. After everyone does the peer teaching, well, how well did they do the peer teaching and peer learning? You can give them a quiz grade based on the group and individual performance there. Or, as I said, you can use it for no quiz at all and simply use it as a way to have the students learn more effectively. And that's how you do Jigsaw.